Violence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you also to the member for Scarborough-Guildwood for his intervention just now. We're debating something that I hope we can look to some consensus. It's a tough issue, and I will confess this, Madam Speaker. It's a tough issue for Green Party members to talk about NATO. Pour nous, la question de l'OTAN sont difficiles et compliquées à cause de notre.
We have a deep commitment to peace and the principles of nonviolence.
Around the world, and I am part of a global party, it doesn't come up very often in this place, that I'm a member of Parliament in Canada within a family of global Greens. One of those global Greens is Pekka Haavisto, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Finland, and who is a very, very germane part of the debate tonight. Up until December, a friend of mine, Per Bolund, co-leader of the Green Party of Sweden, was their Deputy Prime Minister, but the Swedish Greens just left the Swedish coalition for reasons I need not get into here. But just to say, for Greens, we have a profound commitment to peace and nonviolence, which means that, and I'll say it just as clearly as I can, I'm no fan of NATO. Greens aren't generally, because it's a defensive alliance, but it's not without issues for us who are committed to nonviolence. It's been an issue for us to know that we absolutely, unequivocally believe that Russia's attack on Ukraine is Vladimir Putin solely responsible, and we are on the side of Ukraine and Ukrainians. But we also, and we are supportive of every action our government has taken. But it's not without difficulty for us. How do Greens feel about Canada being in NATO? In an ideal world, when the Warsaw Pact ended, NATO would have ended too. That's how we see it. NATO's continued involvement in the world does create tensions that we probably didn't need if, and this is a big if, and this is one of the main things I want to talk about tonight, if we had had the former Soviet Union and the United States pursue nuclear disarmament. When Mikhail Gorbachev was championing perestroika and glasnost, he also picked up the phone and called former U.S. President Ronald Reagan and said, "Do you want to end nuclear weapons? Because I do." And Ronald Reagan said, "I do too." By the way, the reason I know that is that Mikhail Gorbachev told that story to a small group of people in a room in Rio de Janeiro at Rio+5, and I was there because I was part of a committee that Mikhail Gorbachev co-chaired. But in the years that followed, the efforts towards nuclear disarmament faltered. And I believe that Donald Trump was a puppet of Vladimir Putin, and the two of them decided, or at least Putin decided, let's not get rid of nuclear weapons. Let's slow down the talks. Let's not have nuclear nonproliferation discussions anymore. Let's not have nuclear disarmament discussions anymore. It's made the world less safe. In the context of Vladimir Putin and Russia's wars are generally illegal. It's hard to know when a war is exactly legal because many of them are founded on lies. Vietnam War, the Iraq War, we can make up a story and say we need to attack this other country because. But there are some wars that we know were morally justified, such as the Allied forces confronting fascism in the Second World War. Many of our parents, my parents, many people in this room, had family members engaged in a war that is, as the member for Scarborough-Guildwood just said, it's the young people who suffer in wars, it's the young people who die. But some wars are morally, you can see the moral justification. In this case, supporting Ukraine really matters. But I question what Canada should be doing in NATO. And I want to share with all of you that as I conclude that my remarks, I will spoiler alert, agree with a motion that Finland and Sweden should be supported in joining NATO, because that's what they ask for right now. And as I said, my colleagues who are in the Global Green Party, Global Green parliamentarians, ask for that, and we respect the decisions made within countries by our colleagues in the Green Party. No question from Greens that we support that Finland and Sweden should be supported in joining NATO. But let me ask the question. We're going to be, the budget of 2022 said clearly we are going to have a foreign policy review. And in that foreign policy review, I hope we'll ask the question, should Canada stay in NATO? Pourquoi pour le Canada c'est un avantage?
Why, for Canada, it's an advantage to be a member of NATO. Is it an advantage? Perhaps. But the major security threats are not, well, the major threats, rather, aren't military threats. The real threat is climate change. That's the greatest threat to our future, greater than all the military powers in the world.
In NATO, I believe we should stay in NATO to advocate for nuclear disarmament. We would play a role, an important role, in saying to our NATO partners, the world is less safe because of nuclear weapons. If we had succeeded where Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan had hoped to go, where Lester B. Pearson would have hoped to go, if we had moved to remove nuclear weapons, how much more effective would we be now to help Ukraine? When President Zelensky asked us in this space, I mean, his face was there on Zoom, in this space asking for a no-fly zone, we knew we couldn't do it because we're NATO partners. And Vladimir Putin has threatened the use of nuclear weapons. If we were non-aligned, a neutral nation, could we have done more? NATO itself is, in a sense, muscle-bound. It has so many armaments, it has nuclear weapons. It can't confront Russia without threatening what we always heard about in the Cold War, the strategy of nuclear weapons, mutually assured destruction. There's no future or hope in that. So in this instance tonight, for the first time that I've ever had a chance to speak in this place about NATO, I would say to all of my colleagues here, let's look at what makes the world safer. The world will be safer when nuclear weapons are eliminated. We have now before us, and it's taken legal effect, the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Enough countries around the world, nation states, have signed on, but none of the nuclear powers have signed on, and Canada hasn't even signed on to be an observer to the conversation. At the end of this month, June 20th to 22nd in Vienna, will be the first state party gathering under the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I know my colleague here from Edmonton Strathcona and I, and a friend, a senator from the other place, and plan to go to Vienna. We hope our government will be there. We hope our government will be there as a delegation. We hope we sign on. But in the meantime, as we examine this question, Finland and Sweden have been made less secure by Putin's assault on Russia's assault on Ukraine. We have to do two things at all times: defend Ukraine, do everything we can to put pressure on Russia to get to a peace talk, to get to a ceasefire. And we have to look beyond the immediate conflict in Ukraine and say, how do we make the world safer? We make the world safer when nuclear weapons are abolished. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I wanted to share an experience with the Honourable Member about NATO. I was traveling with John Manley, the then Foreign Affairs Minister. Our itinerary was London, Paris, Riga, and Berlin. And when we were in Riga, the president of Latvia came into the room and she harangued John and I for 20 minutes about getting into NATO. This was in September 2001. And she didn't want anything else. She just wanted into NATO because she saw NATO as her best security guarantee against the Russians, frankly. So we go to Germany, and to John's great credit, he put the Latvian question to the Germans. They had the same question. Well, what about the Russians? So is the honourable member prepared to assert her judgment about the utility of NATO against the president of Latvia's judgment about the utility of NATO?
Our member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Madam Speaker, to my friend from Scarborough-Gilwood, in the context of a nuclear-armed Russia and Latvia, that is a concern that I can't second-guess what the president of Latvia said. But would her response have been different if we had done the right thing? When the USSR broke down and capitalism decided to declare capitalism had won and communism had lost, why did we not do a Marshall Plan for Russia? Why did we not build the democratic institutions? Why did we leave the people of Russia to reduced life expectancy, to reduced economic opportunities, and to the crony capitalism of Putin's friends? We let them down. We could change that. So I can't answer the question because the context could have been so different if we'd done more for the people of Russia.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I always appreciate my colleagues' speeches. And not just me. My father also likes listening to my colleagues' speech. And they have a great friendship. And my father, he also said at this house, he always said, when you speak to a motion or bill, when you vote, you need to vote, well, the way you want to, but for the right reasons. I appreciate my colleague for Saanich Gulf Islands because she's always very genuine and honest when she answers questions. If I understand correctly, she will be supporting this motion because Greens in Sweden and Finland support it. But if Greens in Sweden and Finland had not taken a position on this issue, would she have supported the motion? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands. I'd like to thank my dear colleague. I greatly appreciate his kind comments. And he mentioned that his father and I were friends, and that's true. Well, if Green politicians in Finland and Sweden hadn't taken a position, our position might be different. But right now, it's clear that our colleagues in other countries have taken a clear position. They are being threatened by Russia and the Putin regime. And they need the protection of NATO. And that's why the Greens will be voting yes.
We have time for a brief question. The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Speaker, and I'd like to echo some of my colleagues in this place to thank the member for her genuine honesty in her intervention today. Madam Speaker, 2 former Prime Ministers of Canada, 3 former Foreign Ministers, 2 former defense ministers, all members of the Liberal Party, have endorsed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And in fact, they wrote a letter on September 21st, 2019, rebuking NATO for its opposition to the treaty. I'm just wondering if the member can tell us why she thinks that the previous members of this party could support that, but the current government cannot.
Brief answer from the member for Saanich Gulf Island. A brief answer.
Our government appears to be slavishly and unthinkingly willing to do whatever the U.S. administration wants.